Picture this. You've been grinding at your job for 3 years, hitting every deadline, exceeding every target. The annual awards ceremony arrives, and your manager calls out name after name for recognition. Sales achievements, project completions, team leadership, categories you dominated. But somehow, your name never gets called. You sit there watching colleagues collect awards for work you contributed to, for goals you helped them reach. Just as you're questioning everything about your career, the president's secretary appears at your table with 4 words that change everything. Your meeting is ready. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The fluorescent lights in Meridian Financial's downtown Chicago office cast their usual harsh glow across the packed auditorium as Jonah Martinez adjusted her navy blazer for the 3rd time. 3 years of 60-hour weeks had led to this moment, the company's annual Excellence Awards ceremony. Around her, 200 employees filled folding chairs arranged in neat rows, their excited chatter bouncing off the concrete walls of what was normally their parking garage, hastily converted for the occasion. Jonah's palms felt clammy as she glanced at the program in her lap. 15 different award categories were listed, and she had legitimate reasons to expect recognition in at least half of them. The Patterson account, a $1 million client she'd single-handedly rescued from jumping ship to their competitor. The Morrison project, 3 months of sleepless nights that had resulted in a 30% efficiency increase across their entire billing department. The Henderson initiative, her brainchild that had streamlined their customer service protocols and eliminated a 6-week backlog. Regional Manager Derek Hoffman took the stage, his silver hair gleaming under the spotlights they'd rented for the occasion. His practiced smile swept across the crowd as he tapped the microphone twice, sending feedback squealing through the speakers. "Welcome, everyone, to our most successful year yet at Meridian Financial," Derek announced, his voice carrying that forced enthusiasm unique to corporate events. "Tonight, we celebrate the extraordinary individuals who made 2024 a record-breaking year for our company." Scattered applause filled the space. Jonah noticed her colleague Sarah Chen sitting 3 rows ahead, nervously smoothing her red dress. Next to her, Marcus Thompson was checking his phone, probably reviewing notes about his quarterly sales figures. These were her peers, her competition, but also the people she'd collaborated with on countless projects over the past 3 years. "Our first category tonight is Outstanding Customer Relations," Derek continued, pulling a gold envelope from the podium. "This award recognizes someone who went above and beyond to maintain and strengthen our client relationships." Jonah's heart rate quickened. She'd spent countless hours this year rebuilding damaged relationships, implementing new communication strategies, and personally handling the most difficult accounts. The Patterson situation alone should have sealed this award for her. "And the winner is?" Derek paused dramatically. "Marcus Thompson for his exceptional work with the Wellington Group." Applause erupted as Marcus stood up, straightening his tie with obvious surprise. Jonah forced herself to clap along, but her smile felt frozen on her face. Marcus had worked on exactly one difficult client this year, a project she'd actually consulted on when he'd gotten stuck on the contract negotiations. The ceremony continued with mechanical precision. Excellence in project management went to Sarah Chen for coordinating the office renovation, a project that had lasted 6 weeks and involved ordering new furniture. Jonah had managed 3 major system overhauls simultaneously during that same period, each one requiring coordination between multiple departments and external vendors. Innovation in process improvement was awarded to Bradley Wells from the IT department. Jonah stared at the back of Bradley's head as he walked to the stage, remembering the 4-hour meeting where she'd explained her Henderson initiative proposal to him in detail, only to watch him implement a watered-down version and claim it as his own idea. Category after category, award after award, and Jonah's name remained conspicuously absent. She watched Derek's mouth move, heard the applause, saw her colleagues accepting recognition for achievements she'd either led, contributed to significantly, or in some cases, had actually originated. The room felt increasingly warm despite the October evening chill seeping through the garage's metal walls. Outstanding team leadership went to Amanda Foster, who had supervised a team of 3 for exactly 4 months. Jonah had been informally leading cross-departmental initiatives for 2 years, mentoring new hires and coordinating between different divisions whenever conflicts arose. During the brief intermission, Jonah excused herself to the restroom, needing a moment away from the forced smiles and congratulatory small talk. The bathroom mirror reflected someone she barely recognized, hollow-eyed with stress lines that hadn't been there 6 months ago. She'd been so certain tonight would validate all her hard work and would finally showcase her contributions to upper management. When she returned to her seat, Derek was introducing the final award category, Employee of the Year. This was it. This had to be it. No one had put in more hours, handled more complex problems, or contributed more significantly to the company's success than she had. This year's Employee of the Year demonstrated exceptional dedication, innovative thinking, and leadership that truly embodies the Meridian financial spirit, Derek announced, his voice building with theatrical suspense. Jonah's hands gripped the program so tightly the paper began to tear at the edges. Around her, people were sitting forward in their chairs, anticipating the announcement. Someone behind her whispered, "It's gotta be Martinez," and she felt a flutter of hope. Ladies and gentlemen, your 2024 Employee of the Year is Jennifer Walsh. The auditorium erupted in applause as Jennifer Walsh, a junior analyst who'd been with the company for exactly 8 months, stood up with obvious shock. Jonah's vision blurred slightly as she watched Jennifer navigate through the rows of chairs, accepting hugs and handshakes on her way to the stage. Jennifer Walsh, who had worked on exactly 2 minor projects, both of which Jonah had provided guidance for. Jennifer Walsh, whose biggest accomplishment this year was successfully organizing the office holiday party committee. As Derek placed the crystal award in Jennifer's hands and the photographer captured the moment, Jonah felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Not anger exactly, but a cold, crystalline clarity that cut through 3 years of loyalty, dedication, and naive belief that hard work automatically led to recognition. The ceremony concluded with Derek's closing remarks about teamwork and company values, but Jonah heard none of it. She sat in her metal folding chair, surrounded by the sounds of celebration and congratulations, feeling completely invisible. Colleagues filed past her toward the reception tables, laden with sheet cake and coffee, but she remained frozen in place. This was her moment of reckoning. 3 years of arriving early, staying late, taking on extra projects, mentoring struggling teammates, and solving problems that weren't technically her responsibility. 3 years of believing that excellence would speak for itself, that dedication would be noticed, that merit would be rewarded. The garage was nearly empty now, just a few maintenance workers beginning to stack chairs and dismantle the makeshift stage. The harsh fluorescent lights seemed even more unforgiving in the sparse space, highlighting the scattered programs and empty coffee cups left behind by her celebrating colleagues. Just as Jonah was gathering the strength to stand up and face the long drive home to her empty apartment, where she'd probably spend the evening questioning every career decision she'd ever made, she heard the soft click of heels approaching across the concrete floor. The woman approaching wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Jonah's monthly rent. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her stride carried the confident authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention in boardrooms filled with executives. This wasn't just any employee, this was Victoria Sterling, personal secretary to President William Blackwood himself. Victoria's heels echoed in the nearly empty garage as she navigated between the scattered folding chairs with practiced precision. Most employees had migrated to the reception area in the adjacent building, their laughter and conversation creating a distant hum that only emphasized the stark contrast of the now quiet auditorium space. Ms. Martinez? Victoria's voice was crisp, professional, with the kind of refined accent that spoke of private schools and decades of high-level corporate interactions. "I need you to come with me." Jonah looked up from her seat, certain she'd misheard. Victoria Sterling had never spoken to her directly in 3 years of employment. In fact, Jonah wasn't entirely sure Victoria even knew her name until this very moment. The woman existed in the rarefied atmosphere of the executive floor, the 23rd level that required special keycard access and was rumored to have actual artwork instead of motivational posters on the walls. "I'm sorry, what?" Jonah managed, her voice sounding smaller than ended in the cavernous space. "President Blackwood is waiting," Victoria continued, already turning toward the exit that led to the main building. She didn't wait for confirmation or explanation, simply expected to be followed. Jonah scrambled to gather her purse and follow, her lower heels clicking frantically against the concrete as she tried to catch up without appearing to run. The transition from the converted garage to the main building was jarring. Gone were the harsh fluorescent lights and makeshift decorations, replaced by the warm glow of carefully placed sconces and the rich mahogany paneling that defined Meridian Financial's corporate aesthetic. Their footsteps were muffled now by thick carpet that probably cost more per square foot than most people's monthly salaries. Victoria led them directly to the executive elevators, the ones Jonah had walked past countless times but never used. A simple wave of Victoria's keycard granted them access, and soon they were ascending past floors Jonah had never seen. The elevator was lined with mirrors and featured a small bench upholstered in leather that was softer than her living room couch. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "May I ask what this is about?" Jonah ventured as they passed the 15th floor. Victoria's reflection in the mirror showed no change in expression. "President Blackwood will explain everything." 21st floor, 22nd, 23rd. The elevator came to a stop with barely a whisper, and the doors opened to reveal a reception area that looked like something from a luxury hotel. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, and the furniture was the kind of antique pieces she'd only seen in museums. The silence up here was profound. No ringing phones, no keyboard clicking, no background hum of office equipment. Just the soft sound of their footsteps on Persian rugs that had probably been hand-woven by artisans whose names were listed on small plaques near each piece. Victoria paused at a pair of double doors made from what appeared to be solid walnut, their brass handles polished to mirror brightness. She knocked twice, brief, professional taps, and waited for the response from within. "Come in." The voice was unmistakably William Blackwood's, though Jonah had only heard it during company-wide video conferences and the occasional all-hands meeting. In person, it carried a warmth that didn't translate through electronic speakers. Victoria opened the doors and stepped aside, gesturing for Jonah to enter. The office beyond was enormous, larger than most apartments, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Chicago's downtown skyline. The lights of the city stretched endlessly in every direction, creating a glittering backdrop that made the space feel suspended above the ordinary world. President Blackwood stood behind a desk that could have doubled as a small aircraft carrier, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the city below. He was younger than Jonah had expected, perhaps 55, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of athletic build that suggested he made time for regular workouts despite running a multi-billion-dollar corporation. "Miss Martinez," he said without turning around, "thank you for joining me. Please, have a seat." The chairs facing his desk were leather masterpieces that probably cost more than Jonah's car. She settled into one carefully, her mind racing through possibilities. Had she made some catastrophic error? Was she being fired? Has someone filed a complaint? The timing, right after the awards ceremony, felt ominous. Blackwood turned from the window and moved to sit across from her, his movements deliberate and controlled. Up close, his eyes were a startling blue, and they seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance with the precision of someone accustomed to reading people quickly and accurately. "I imagine you're wondering why you're here," he began, settling back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone completely comfortable in positions of authority. "The thought had crossed my mind," Jonah replied, surprised by her own steadiness. Something about the surreal nature of the situation had pushed her past nervousness into a strange kind of calm acceptance. A slight smile played at the corners of Blackwood's mouth. "I've been watching your work, Miss Martinez, watching it very carefully. The Patterson account recovery was masterful. You turned a potential $2 million loss into our strongest client relationship. The Morrison project exceeded efficiency projections by 18% above your initial estimates. The Henderson initiative has been adopted by 3 other departments and is being considered for company-wide implementation." Jonah's breath caught in her throat. He knew. He knew about everything, not just the big projects, but the specific details, the actual numbers, the real impact of her work. "I also watched tonight's ceremony with great interest," Blackwood continued, his tone remaining conversational but taking on an edge that suggested deeper currents beneath the surface. "It was quite educational to see how middle management chooses to recognize excellence within this organization." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Jonah didn't dare interpret too optimistically. She remained silent, sensing that this conversation was moving towards something significant, and that her best strategy was to listen rather than fill the space with nervous chatter. Blackwood leaned forward slightly, his intense gaze never wavering from her face. "Tell me, Miss Martinez, what did you think of tonight's award ceremony?" The question was clearly a test, though what kind of test remained unclear. Jonah considered her options: diplomatic deflection, enthusiastic false praise for her colleagues, or something closer to the truth. The traditional corporate response would be to smile and express happiness for the winners while diplomatically avoiding any hint of criticism. But sitting in this office, 30 floors above the city, face to face with the man who apparently knew exactly what she'd contributed to the company's success, traditional corporate responses felt suddenly inadequate. "I thought it was very revealing," Jonah said finally, choosing her words carefully but allowing a note of honest assessment to creep into her voice. Blackwood's smile widened, and for the first time since entering his office, Jonah felt like she might have given the right answer. The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Jonah studied Blackwood's face, searching for clues about what kind of enemies he meant and what exactly she'd be walking into if she accepted his offer. "What kind of enemies?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Blackwood's expression grew darker, the city lights behind him casting sharp shadows across his features. "The kind who've built careers by taking credit for other people's work. The kind who've created networks of mutual protection that spans multiple departments and several layers of management." He opened her file and pulled out what appeared to be an organizational chart, but this one was unlike anything Jonah had ever seen in corporate training materials. Instead of simple reporting lines, it showed intricate webs connecting various managers across different divisions, with notes and dates marking specific instances of credit theft, project manipulation, and performance misrepresentation. "What kind of enemies?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Blackwood's expression grew darker, the city lights behind him casting sharp shadows across his features. "The kind who've built careers by taking credit for other people's work. The kind who've created networks of mutual protection that spans multiple departments and several layers of management." He opened her file and pulled out what appeared to be an organizational chart, but this one was unlike anything Jonah had ever seen in corporate training materials. Instead of simple reporting lines, it showed intricate webs connecting various managers across different divisions, with notes and dates marking specific instances of credit theft, project manipulation, and performance misrepresentation. "Derek Hoffman isn't operating in isolation," Blackwood continued, pointing to Derek's position on the chart. "He's part of what I call the Credit Redistribution Network, a group of middle managers who've learned to systematically harvest the innovations and achievements of their subordinates while protecting each other from accountability." Jonah leaned forward to examine the chart more closely. Names she recognized were connected by red lines, indicating collaborative credit theft, with green lines showing protection relationships where managers covered for each other's failures. The complexity was staggering. It looked like a criminal conspiracy flowchart. Amanda Foster in team leadership has been feeding Derek information about high-performing employees in other departments, allowing him to poach their ideas before those employees get recognition. In return, Derek ensures that Amanda's team gets credit for cross-departmental projects they barely participated in. His finger traced the connections as he spoke, revealing a shadow organization operating within the legitimate corporate structure. Bradley Wells in IT provides early access to system improvement suggestions from the company suggestion portal, allowing this group to implement watered-down versions and claim innovation credit. The original suggestions get mysteriously lost in the system. Jonah's stomach churned as she realized how systematic and deliberate the suppression of her contributions had been. This wasn't just workplace politics or incompetent management, it was organized theft of intellectual property and achievement. Jennifer Walsh, Blackwood continued, his voice taking on a tone of particular disdain, was selected for Employee of the Year specifically because she's being groomed as Derek's eventual replacement. Her rapid promotion and tonight's award are part of a succession plan designed to perpetuate this system indefinitely. The revelation hit Jonah like a physical blow. Jennifer's award hadn't been a mistake or oversight. It had been a calculated move to establish her credibility for future leadership roles within the corrupt network. So when you ask about making enemies, Blackwood said, closing the file and fixing Jonah with his intense stare, I'm talking about dismantling a system that currently benefits dozens of people who've built their careers on this foundation of theft and deception. Jonah sat back in her chair, the enormity of the situation beginning to sink in. Accepting this promotion wouldn't just mean managing a department. It would mean declaring war on an entrenched power structure that had been operating with impunity for years. What happened to the previous person who tried to challenge the system? She asked, though she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. Robert Chen, Sarah's older brother actually, brilliant analyst who started asking uncomfortable questions about project attribution and performance metrics. He was systematically isolated, had his access to information restricted, and eventually resigned after Derek orchestrated a performance review that questioned his team collaboration skills. The clinical way Blackwood described Robert's destruction was almost more chilling than if he'd shown emotion about it. This wasn't personal vendetta. It was business warfare conducted with corporate precision. Robert now works for our competitor, Pinnacle Financial, where he's been promoted twice in 18 months and is currently heading their innovation department. His insights into our internal processes have cost us approximately $2 million in lost competitive advantages. Jonah absorbed this information, understanding that Robert's story could easily become her own if she wasn't prepared for the retaliation that would inevitably come. But Robert was fighting alone, Blackwood continued, his tone shifting slightly. He didn't have executive backing, access to the documentation we've compiled, or the authority to make structural changes. You would. He opened a drawer and withdrew another folder, this one significantly thicker than Jonah's personnel file. This contains evidence of every instance of credit theft, performance manipulation, and systematic fraud we've documented. Financial impact assessments, timeline analyses, communication records, everything needed to justify not just dismissals, but potential legal action for corporate fraud. The weight of what he was offering began to settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just a promotion, it was an invitation to become his instrument of organizational justice, armed with the evidence and authority needed to completely restructure the power dynamics that had defined her career. Why me? Jonah asked. You could hire an external consultant, bring in someone from another company, promote someone from a different division who hasn't been personally targeted by this system. Blackwood smiled, and for the first time since she'd entered his office, it seemed genuinely warm rather than strategically calculated. Because you understand the real work, you know the difference between actual performance and performance theater. Most importantly, you've experienced firsthand how this system crushes genuine talent, so you'll have the motivation to ensure it doesn't happen to others. He stood up and moved to the window again, his reflection overlaying the city lights in a way that made him appear almost ghost-like against the urban landscape. Also, frankly, because you're angry. Righteous anger is an incredibly powerful management tool when properly channeled. The people who've been stealing credit and suppressing talent should be afraid of you, Miss Martinez. Their fear will make them careless, and their carelessness will make them vulnerable. Jonah realized that everything about this conversation had been carefully orchestrated. Blackwood hadn't just discovered her work recently, he'd been monitoring the situation for months, possibly years, waiting for the right moment and the right person to implement his solution. The ceremony tonight wasn't an oversight, she said, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. You let it happen because you needed me to see the full scope of how systematic the problem was. Very good, Blackwood replied, turning back to face her with obvious approval. If I'd simply offered you a promotion based on your performance metrics, you might have accepted gracefully and tried to work within the existing system. But after tonight, after watching your contributions be systematically ignored and credited to others, you understand that working within this system is impossible. The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication, but Jonah found herself admiring rather than resenting it. He'd engineered a situation where her anger and ambition aligned perfectly with his corporate objectives. So, Blackwood said, returning to his chair and leaning forward with the intensity of someone closing a crucial negotiation, are you prepared to take Derek's job and everything that comes with it, including the guarantee that some very influential people are going to try to destroy your career in retaliation? Jonah looked down at the evidence files, then backed up at Blackwood's expectant face. 3 years of suppressed frustration, stolen recognition, and systematic undermining crystallized into a single moment of absolute clarity. When do I start? Blackwood's smile was sharp as a blade as he reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a leather portfolio that looked like it had never been used. Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. Victoria will escort you to Derek's office, which is now your office, and we'll begin the transition immediately. The speed of everything made Jonah's head spin. Less than 3 hours ago, she'd been sitting in a folding chair watching her achievements get credited to other people. Now she was being handed the keys to an entire regional operation with the backing of the company president himself. What about Derek? What happened to him? Derek will be informed Sunday evening that he's being reassigned to our new client relations specialist position in our Milwaukee branch. It's a lateral move in terms of title, but his new salary will more accurately reflect his actual contributions to the organization. The clinical efficiency of Derek's demotion was almost breathtaking. No drama, no confrontation, just a simple reassignment that would remove him from Chicago entirely while maintaining the corporate fiction that this was routine personnel management. He'll fight it, Jonah said, though she wasn't sure why she felt compelled to warn Blackwood about something he'd obviously anticipated. Of course he will. Derek's not stupid. He understands exactly what this reassignment represents. He'll likely attempt to rally his network, claim discrimination, perhaps even threaten legal action. Blackwood's tone suggested he was discussing weather patterns rather than corporate warfare, which is why your first week will be particularly challenging. He opened the leather portfolio and began laying out documents across the expansive desk: organization charts, performance reviews, financial summaries, and what appeared to be transcripts of recorded conversations. Amanda Foster will be your first major test. She's already been positioning herself as Derek's natural successor and has cultivated relationships with several department heads who owe their current positions to the existing system. She'll view your promotion as a direct threat to her career trajectory. Jonas studied Amanda's personnel file as Blackwood slid it across the desk. The woman had been with Meridian Financial for 8 years, steadily climbing through various supervisory roles, despite performance metrics that were mediocre at best. Her real skill seemed to be networking and alliance building rather than actual leadership or innovation. Amanda will attempt to undermine your authority by questioning your qualifications in front of other managers. She'll suggest that your promotion was based on favoritism rather than merit, and she'll work to turn your new direct reports against you before you have a chance to establish your leadership style. The psychological warfare aspect of corporate politics had never been something Jonah had fully appreciated before tonight. She'd always assumed that good work would speak for itself, but clearly she'd been naive about the sophisticated manipulation that occurred at management levels. Your second challenge will be Marcus Thompson. His award tonight wasn't coincidental, it was strategic positioning. Derek has been grooming Marcus as his ally in account management, and Marcus believes his recognition tonight validates his potential for promotion within the existing power structure. Blackwood pulled out another file, this one containing detailed analysis of Marcus's actual performance versus his perceived contributions. The discrepancy was even more stark than Jonah had realized. Marcus will likely attempt to circumvent your authority by maintaining direct communication with Derek, even after the reassignment. He'll frame this as continuity of client relationships, but the real purpose will be to demonstrate that Derek's network remains intact despite his physical relocation. The sophistication of the resistance she was about to face was becoming clearer with each file Blackwood revealed. This wasn't just about managing a department, it was about dismantling a shadow organization that had been operating for years with its own communication channels and loyalty structures. Jennifer Walsh represents your most dangerous opponent, Blackwood continued, his tone becoming more serious. Her Employee of the Year award was specifically designed to establish her credibility as leadership material. She's young, ambitious, and has been convinced that Derek's mentorship represents her fast track to executive-level positions. Jennifer's file was thinner than the others, but the documents it contained were more ominous. Performance reviews that were obviously inflated, project assignments that had been carefully selected to showcase her in favorable contexts, and recommendation letters from managers throughout the organization who barely knew her actual work. Jennifer will be the most personal in her attacks because she has the most to lose. Derek promised her his position within 2 years, and your promotion has essentially destroyed that timeline. She'll use her recent award as evidence that the company is making a mistake by overlooking obvious talent in favor of less obvious choices. The implication that Jennifer would play racial or gender cards in her campaign against Jonah's authority was left unspoken, but clearly understood. Corporate politics often devolved into identity-based arguments when performance-based arguments failed. Now for the good news, Blackwood said, closing the hostile files and opening a different section of the portfolio. You won't be fighting this battle alone. The next set of documents revealed a network of employees throughout the organization whose actual performance had been consistently strong, but whose contributions had been systematically overlooked or minimized. These were the people who, like Jonah, had been doing the real work while others claimed the credit. Rebecca Torres in customer service has been developing innovative client retention strategies that have reduced churn by 23% over the past year. Her direct supervisor has been claiming credit for her innovations while keeping her trapped in a senior representative role. Jonah recognized Rebecca's name from company-wide emails, though they'd never worked directly together. She was known for solving the most difficult customer problems and had developed an unofficial reputation as the person to call when standard protocols failed. David Kim in business development has been identifying and cultivating relationships with high-value prospects that have resulted in $1.6 million in new business. His manager has been presenting these acquisitions as results of the department's strategic planning rather than David's individual initiative. The pattern was becoming clear. Throughout the organization, there was a parallel workforce of highly productive individuals whose contributions had been systematically harvested by the management layer above them. These people represent your natural allies, Ms. Martinez. They understand the frustration of watching others receive recognition for their work, and they'll be motivated to help you succeed because your success represents the possibility that merit might actually be rewarded at Meridian Financial. Blackwood began stacking the files back into organized piles, his movements precise and methodical. Your first month will determine whether this restructuring succeeds or fails. If you can successfully establish your authority, demonstrate that performance will be accurately recognized, and begin promoting people based on actual contributions rather than political connections, you'll create momentum that will be difficult for the old network to stop.
The weight of responsibility was enormous, but for the first time in years, Jonah felt like she was being offered the tools and authority needed to actually make meaningful changes rather than just hoping her work would eventually be noticed.
What if I fail? She asked, voicing the fear that had been growing throughout their conversation. Blackwood's expression became almost paternal, though his eyes remained sharp with calculation. Then Derek returns to Chicago within 6 months, Amanda gets promoted to regional manager, Jennifer becomes her deputy, and the system continues exactly as it has been. The people doing real work continue to be exploited, innovation continues to be stolen, and Meridian Financial gradually loses competitive advantage as our best talent either becomes demoralized or leaves for companies that actually recognize merit. The stakes couldn't have been clearer. This wasn't just about Jonah's career. It was about whether genuine performance would be valued at Meridian Financial or whether the credit theft network would continue to drain the company's potential indefinitely. I understand, Jonah said, surprised by how calm she felt despite the magnitude of what she was accepting. When do I get access to the evidence files you mentioned earlier? Victoria will provide you with complete documentation Sunday afternoon, along with your new security credentials and executive-level system access. You'll have 72 hours to review everything before your first staff meeting Wednesday morning. Blackwood stood up and extended his hand across the desk, and Jonah realized this was her final moment of decision. Once she shook his hand, there would be no going back to her quiet analyst position and her invisible contributions. She stood up and grasped his hand firmly, feeling the calluses that suggested he still did actual work despite his executive status. Welcome to the executive team, Regional Manager Martinez. 3 months later, Jonah sat in what used to be Derek's office, reviewing the quarterly performance metrics that would be presented to the board next week. The mahogany desk that had once symbolized everything she couldn't achieve now held stacks of reports documenting the most dramatic departmental transformation in Meridian Financial's recent history. The first sign that her new position was working had come exactly 6 days into her tenure, when Rebecca Torres had identified a pattern of billing errors that previous management had ignored for 18 months. The correction had recovered $340,000 in lost revenue and prevented a potential audit crisis that could have cost millions in penalties. Rebecca now held the title of Customer Relations Director, with a salary increase that reflected her actual contributions to the company's success. More importantly, she'd been given a team of 5 analysts specifically tasked with identifying and preventing similar systemic problems before they became expensive crises. David Kim's promotion to Senior Business Development Manager had triggered a domino effect throughout the sales organization. Within 6 weeks of receiving proper recognition and resources, he'd closed deals worth $2.8 million, more than his previous manager had achieved in 2 full years. The ripple effects had motivated other sales staff to push harder, knowing that exceptional performance would actually be noticed and rewarded. But the real validation of Blackwood's strategy had come from an unexpected source: the company's client satisfaction surveys. For the first time in 4 years, Meridian Financial had achieved above industry average ratings across every major category. Clients were reporting faster response times, more innovative solutions, and a noticeable improvement in the competence of staff members handling their accounts. The improvements weren't just statistical abstractions, they represented real people whose careers had been liberated from the credit theft system that had suppressed their potential for years. Jonah had implemented an open-source innovation policy where any employee could submit improvement suggestions directly to executive leadership, bypassing the middle management filter that had previously buried most valuable ideas. The resistance had been exactly as intense as Blackwood had predicted, but it had also been more revealing than Jonah had anticipated. Amanda Foster's campaign against her authority had exposed a network of interdepartmental favoritism that extended far beyond the Chicago region. The documentation process had revealed that Amanda had been coordinating with managers in Detroit and St. Louis to systematically suppress talent that might threaten the established hierarchy. Amanda's removal had been swift and decisive once the full scope of her activities became clear.
Unlike Derek's gentle reassignment, Amanda had been terminated for cause, with detailed documentation of her deliberate sabotage of company productivity and employee development. The message to other potential resistors had been unmistakable. The old system wasn't just being reformed, it was being eliminated entirely. Marcus Thompson had proven more adaptable than expected. After 2 weeks of attempting to maintain back-channel communication with Derek in Milwaukee, Marcus had apparently recognized that his survival depended on accepting the new performance-based evaluation system. His transition had been grudging but complete, and his actual work had improved considerably once he could no longer rely on political connections to compensate for mediocre results. Jennifer Walsh had been the most interesting case study. Her initial resistance had been fierce and personal, including attempts to organize other recent award winners against what she termed arbitrary management changes. But Jennifer was intelligent, and intelligence eventually forced her to confront the reality that her Employee of the Year award had been based on manufactured achievements rather than genuine performance. The breakthrough had come when Jonah offered Jennifer a choice. She could continue fighting the new system and likely find herself managed out within 6 months, or she could prove that she deserved recognition by actually earning it through measurable contributions. Jennifer had chosen the latter path, and the results had been surprising.
Freed from the pressure to maintain political alliances and focus on perception management, Jana had discovered an aptitude for process analysis that no one had previously recognized. Her systematic review of departmental workflows had identified redundancies that were costing the company thousands of hours annually in unnecessary duplicate efforts. Jana's transformation from political operator to genuine contributor had become one of Jana's most satisfying management successes. It demonstrated that some people caught up in the credit theft system were victims rather than perpetrators, capable of real achievement once given appropriate direction and incentives. The broader organizational changes had been equally dramatic. Blackwood had used the Chicago region's success as a model for restructuring operations in 5 other major markets. The documentation methods that Jana had helped refine were now being implemented company-wide, creating transparent accountability systems that made it nearly impossible for managers to claim credit for their subordinates' work. Employee turnover in high-performing staff had dropped to the lowest levels in company history, while turnover among ineffective managers had increased dramatically as they found themselves unable to survive in an environment that measured actual results rather than political maneuvering. The financial impact had exceeded even Blackwood's optimistic projections. The Chicago region's productivity had increased by 47% in the first quarter under Jana's management, while costs had decreased by 12% through the elimination of redundant supervisory positions and more efficient resource allocation. But perhaps the most significant change had been cultural. The fear that had previously characterized employee interactions, the constant worry about having ideas stolen or contributions minimized, had been replaced by an atmosphere of collaborative innovation. People were sharing ideas freely because they knew they would receive appropriate recognition for successful implementations. Jana's own role had evolved beyond regional management into something closer to organizational development. Blackwood had assigned her additional responsibilities as Director of Performance Excellence, tasked with identifying and eliminating similar credit theft networks throughout the company's other divisions. The work was more complex and challenging than anything she'd ever attempted, but it was also more satisfying than she'd imagined possible. Instead of quietly solving problems and watching others receive recognition, she was now responsible for ensuring that recognition went to the people who actually deserved it. Her salary had increased twice in 3 months, not as political rewards, but as compensation adjustments that reflected her expanded responsibilities and measurable impact on company performance. The financial security was welcome, but the professional satisfaction was transformative. The phone rang, interrupting her review of the quarterly metrics. Victoria Sterling's voice came through the speaker with its characteristic precision. "Miss Martinez, President Blackwood would like to see you in his office at your earliest convenience." 3 months ago, a summons to Blackwood's office would have triggered panic and anxiety. Now, it typically meant new challenges and opportunities that matched her expanding capabilities.
I'll be right up, Jonna replied, gathering the performance reports that demonstrated how dramatically the Chicago region had been transformed. As she rode the executive elevator to the 23rd floor, Jonna reflected on how completely her professional life had changed. The woman who had sat in that converted garage, watching her achievements get credited to others, felt like a different person entirely. That woman had been trapped in a system designed to exploit her talents while denying her recognition or advancement. This woman, Regional Manager Martinez, Director of Performance Excellence Martinez, was helping to dismantle that system and replace it with something that actually rewarded merit and innovation. The elevator doors opened, and Victoria greeted her with what had become a familiar professional warmth. Working directly with executive leadership had taught Jonna to recognize the difference between genuine respect and corporate politeness, and Victoria's demeanor reflected authentic regard rather than mere courtesy. "He's waiting for you," Victoria said, gesturing toward the familiar double doors. Jonna entered Blackwood's office with the confidence of someone who belonged there, someone whose presence represented value rather than disruption. The city lights still created their dramatic backdrop, but now they seemed welcoming rather than intimidating. "Congratulations on the quarterly numbers," Blackwood said without preamble, gesturing for her to take her usual seat across from his desk. 47% productivity increase with 12% cost reduction. Those are numbers that make board members very happy.
Thank you, sir. The team has been exceptional once they had proper leadership structure and recognition systems in place. Which brings me to why I asked you here, Blackwood continued, his tone taking on the familiar cadence that indicated he was about to present her with something significant. How would you feel about taking those systems national? The words hung in the air like a challenge and an opportunity rolled into one. National implementation meant taking everything she'd learned in Chicago and scaling it across 8,000 employees in 12 states. It meant dismantling credit theft networks that had been operating for decades, confronting entrenched power structures that spanned entire regions, and rebuilding performance evaluation systems from the ground up. "That's a significant undertaking," Jonna replied, though her mind was already racing through the logistical implications. "What kind of timeline are we discussing?" Blackwood leaned back in his chair, his expression mixing satisfaction with anticipation. 18 months for full implementation, 6 months for the pilot expansion to our 5 largest markets outside Chicago. The board has allocated $2.3 million for the initiative, including budget for additional staff, technology upgrades, and the inevitable legal challenges from displaced managers. The mention of legal challenges reminded Jonna that success at the regional level was entirely different from success at the corporate level. Regional politics were complex enough, but national corporate politics involved unions, regulatory considerations, and stakeholder relationships that could make or break entire companies. What kind of resistance should I expect from established regional managers? Significant, Blackwood admitted with a slight smile. The Detroit operation has been particularly creative in their interpretation of performance metrics. Their regional manager, Catherine Walsh, no relation to Jennifer, has built what might generously be called a collaborative management style and less generously called a sophisticated embezzlement scheme. He opened a folder that made Jonna's original documentation look sparse by comparison. Charts, financial analyses, and what appeared to be surveillance transcripts painted a picture of systematic fraud that went far beyond simple credit theft. Catherine has been artificially inflating her region's performance numbers by claiming partial credit for deals closed by other regions, manipulating client satisfaction surveys, and in some cases, simply fabricating metrics for projects that were never completed. The audacity was breathtaking, but Jonna had learned enough about corporate dysfunction to know that sophisticated fraud often thrives in environments where oversight was minimal and political connections provided protection. How has she maintained this system without detection? By ensuring that everyone beneath her in the hierarchy benefits from the arrangement. Regional supervisors receive inflated performance bonuses, department heads get promoted based on manufactured achievements, and even junior staff members receive recognition for work they never actually performed. Jonna understood immediately why this would be her most difficult challenge yet. Catherine hadn't just built a credit theft network, she'd created an entire alternate reality where everyone's career advancement depended on maintaining collective fiction about their productivity. That's a significant undertaking, she said, already anticipating the complexity of unraveling years of coordinated deception. Exactly, which is why I'm not asking you to handle it alone. Blackwood opened another section of his folder, revealing organizational charts that showed a much larger operation than Jonah had expected. You'll be heading a team of 12 specialists, forensic accountants, organizational psychologists, legal analysts, and experienced managers from other companies who have handled similar restructuring projects. The scope of resources being allocated to this project demonstrated how seriously Blackwood viewed both the opportunity and the threat. This wasn't just about improving performance metrics. It was about determining whether merit-based evaluation could actually function in large corporate environments, or whether political manipulation was an inevitable byproduct of organizational scale. The Detroit situation represents our worst-case scenario, Blackwood continued, but it also represents our greatest opportunity for demonstrating that these systems can be identified, documented, and eliminated even when they've achieved sophisticated operational integration. Over the next hour, Blackwood outlined similar situations in Phoenix, Atlanta, and Denver, regional operations where productivity had stagnated despite apparent success in traditional metrics, where high-performing individuals consistently left for competitor companies, and where innovation had essentially stopped despite substantial resource allocation. Each situation was unique in its specific dysfunction, but the underlying pattern was consistent. Middle management layers that had evolved into value extraction systems rather than value creation systems, suppressing talent and innovation while creating elaborate facades of competence and achievement. Your success in Chicago has given us a proof of concept, Blackwood explained, but scaling that success nationally will require adapting the model to different regional cultures, different competitive environments, and different regulatory contexts. The challenge was intellectually fascinating and professionally terrifying in equal measure. Jonah had proven she could identify and eliminate dysfunction within a single region where she understood the personalities and relationships involved. National implementation meant dealing with thousands of people she'd never met, operating in markets she'd never studied, confronting resistance strategies she couldn't anticipate. But it also meant the opportunity to liberate genuine talent on a scale that could transform the entire company's competitive position. Every regional operation that shifted from political management to performance management would become more innovative, more efficient, and more attractive to the kind of employees who actually created value rather than just claimed credit for it. "What's the timeline for my decision?" Jonah asked, though she already knew she was going to accept the challenge. "I need your answer by Friday. If you accept, we'll announce the promotion Monday morning and begin assembling your team immediately. Your first target will be the Phoenix region, smaller than Detroit, less sophisticated in their dysfunction, but still representative of the problems we need to solve." The practical implications began crystallizing in her mind. New office space, expanded staff, travel requirements that would probably consume half her time for the next year and a half. But also the chance to take everything she'd learned about recognizing and rewarding actual performance and implement it on a scale that could influence industry standards beyond just Meridian Financial. "There's one more consideration," Blackwood added, his tone becoming more serious. "Success in this role will position you as my likely successor when I retire in 4 years. Failure will probably end your career in financial services, since other companies will view you as responsible for a very public and expensive corporate restructuring disaster." The stakes couldn't have been clearer. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a fundamental bet on whether her approach to management could function at the highest levels of corporate leadership. Success meant eventual presidency of an 8,000-person company. Failure meant professional exile and probably bankruptcy, given the legal exposure that came with dismantling established power structures. "I understand the risks," Jonah replied, surprised by how steady her voice remained despite the magnitude of what she was contemplating. "Good. Then you also understand why I'm offering you this opportunity despite its obvious dangers." Blackwood's expression had shifted to something approaching paternal pride.
You've demonstrated that you can identify real performance, reward genuine achievement, and eliminate systems that punish excellence. Those skills are rare enough at the departmental level. At the corporate level, they're almost non-existent. Jonah stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that had intimidated her so completely during her first visit to this office. The city lights still stretched endlessly in every direction, but now they seemed less like a symbol of unattainable success and more like a map of possibilities waiting to be explored. 6 months ago, she'd been a senior analyst whose contributions were systematically ignored and credited to others. 3 months ago, she'd been handed an opportunity to prove that merit-based evaluation could work at the regional level. Now, she was being offered the chance to implement those same principles across an entire national organization. The progression felt both inevitable and impossible. Inevitable because each success had logically led to greater opportunities. Impossible because the scale of change felt almost too dramatic to be real. "I accept," she said, turning back to face Blackwood with the same clarity she'd felt when she'd first shaken his hand 3 months earlier. "Excellent." Blackwood stood and moved to join her at the window, both of them looking out at the city that had become the testing ground for everything they were about to attempt on a much larger scale. "Welcome to the executive track, Vice President Martinez." Vice President. The title carried weight that went far beyond salary or corner offices. It meant responsibility for outcomes that would affect thousands of careers, influence industry practices, and potentially determine whether one of America's largest financial services companies would thrive or gradually decline into mediocrity. "Your first board presentation is in 3 weeks," Blackwood continued. "You'll be presenting the Chicago model as the template for national expansion. The board members are traditional in their management philosophy, so expect skepticism about dismantling systems that have been profitable for decades." "Profitable but not optimal," Jonah replied, already anticipating the arguments she'd need to make. "Our productivity increases demonstrate that the existing system was actually suppressing profitability by wasting human resources and discouraging innovation." Exactly the kind of data-driven argument that will resonate with board members who care more about results than traditional hierarchies. As they shook hands again, sealing her acceptance of the promotion that would define the next phase of her career, Jonah reflected on how completely her understanding of corporate success had changed. 6 months ago, she'd believed that excellence would eventually be recognized through some natural process of organizational meritocracy. Now she understood that organizational meritocracy had to be deliberately created, carefully maintained, and aggressively defended against the political forces that constantly work to undermine it. Recognition of genuine achievement wasn't a natural byproduct of corporate culture. It was an ongoing management choice that required constant vigilance and occasional dramatic intervention. The woman who had sat in that converted garage, watching mediocrity receive awards meant for excellence, had been naive about how organizations actually functioned. But that naivety had also contained an uncompromising belief that performance should determine advancement, that innovation should be rewarded, and that credit should go to the people who actually deserved it. Vice President Martinez still held those same beliefs, but now she also possessed the authority, resources, and strategic understanding needed to implement them on a scale that could transform an entire industry's approach to human resource management. The real work was just beginning. Walking back to her office that evening, Jonah's mind was already shifting into strategic planning mode. The elevator descended past floors filled with employees who had no idea their professional lives were about to be fundamentally altered by the initiative she'd just agreed to lead. Some would thrive under performance-based evaluation systems. Others would find themselves exposed as elaborate facades with no substance beneath their political connections. The transition period would be brutal for everyone involved. 18 months of systematic reorganization meant 18 months of uncertainty, resistance, and inevitable conflict as entrenched interests fought to preserve systems that had served them well despite their negative impact on overall corporate performance. Her first stop would be assembling a team capable of handling the psychological and logistical complexity of large-scale organizational change. The forensic accountants would identify financial irregularities, but the real challenge would be managing the human element, thousands of employees whose career trajectories would be dramatically altered by the shift from political evaluation to performance evaluation. The Phoenix region would serve as her testing ground for scaling the Chicago model. Unlike Detroit's sophisticated fraud operation, Phoenix appeared to suffer from more traditional dysfunction. Competent but unexceptional managers who had learned to game performance metrics without technically violating company policies. Regional manager Thomas Bradley had been running Phoenix operations for 6 years, with results that consistently met but never exceeded corporate targets. His performance reviews were filled with praise for his steady leadership and collaborative approach, corporate euphemisms that typically masked an absence of genuine achievement. The documentation Blackwood had provided revealed a more troubling pattern. Phoenix's most innovative employees had been systematically transferred to other regions or encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere. Project timelines were consistently extended to accommodate stakeholder input and consensus building, processes that seemed designed more to diffuse individual accountability than to improve actual outcomes. Bradley's management philosophy appeared to be based on the principle that mediocre performance from everyone was preferable to exceptional performance from individuals, since exceptional individual performance created uncomfortable comparisons and threatened team cohesion. The approach had created a regional culture where innovation was subtly discouraged, initiative was viewed with suspicion, and the safest career strategy was to avoid standing out in any meaningful way. Phoenix employees had learned to manage their own performance down to levels that wouldn't make their colleagues uncomfortable or challenge their supervisor's authority. Transforming this environment would require more than just changing evaluation criteria. It would require rebuilding the entire cultural foundation that determined how employees thought about success, risk-taking, and professional development. Jonah's phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca Torres, now thriving in her role as Customer Relations Director in Chicago. The message was brief but significant. 3 more major accounts saved this week using the systematic analysis protocols we developed. Total recovery value, $890,000. Team morale at all-time high. The success in Chicago continued to compound, validating every aspect of the performance-based management model they'd implemented. More importantly, it demonstrated that the cultural changes were sustainable rather than temporary improvements driven by novelty or executive attention. David Kim had sent similar updates throughout the week, reporting new business acquisitions that exceeded his quarterly targets by 40%. But the real indicator of systemic change was that other sales staff were achieving similar results as they adapted to an environment where genuine performance was recognized and rewarded rather than overlooked in favor of political maneuvering. The ripple effects extended beyond individual departments. Interdepartmental collaboration had improved dramatically once employees realized that contributing to other teams' success would be recognized rather than ignored. The zero-sum mentality that had previously characterized most cross-functional projects had been replaced by genuine partnership, focused on achieving the best possible outcomes for clients and the company overall. These cultural transformations couldn't be mandated through policy changes or organizational charts. They emerged naturally when employees understood that their individual excellence would be accurately measured and appropriately rewarded. The Chicago experience had proven that most people prefer to excel when excellence is valued, but would adapt to mediocrity when mediocrity was safer. Scaling this cultural transformation to 12 regions would require careful attention to local variations in business practices, competitive environments, and regulatory requirements. Phoenix's challenges wouldn't be identical to Atlanta's or Denver's, and successful implementation would depend on adapting the core principles to specific regional contexts.
The financial implications of national success were staggering. If every region achieved productivity improvements similar to Chicago's 47% increase, Meridian Financial would become the most efficient financial services company in North America within 2 years. The competitive advantages would compound exponentially as superior performance attracted better clients, more innovative employees, and increased market share. But failure would be equally dramatic in its consequences. A botched national restructuring would destroy employee morale, trigger regulatory scrutiny, and potentially cause client defections that could take decades to recover from.
The legal exposure alone from displacing hundreds of managers could bankrupt the company if the documentation wasn't absolutely bulletproof. Jonah's evening was spent reviewing personnel files for potential team members who could handle different aspects of the national implementation. The forensic accounting component would require specialists experienced in uncovering sophisticated financial manipulation without disrupting ongoing operations. The legal analysis would need experts in employment law who understood both the protection of legitimate whistleblowers and the prosecution of systematic fraud. Most critically, she needed experienced change management specialists who had successfully transformed organizational cultures in large corporations without triggering the kind of employee revolt that could derail the entire initiative. The psychological consulting component was particularly important given the personal nature of the changes they were implementing. Employees who had built careers on political connections rather than performance would experience something approaching a professional identity crisis as their familiar systems disappeared. Some would adapt and discover capabilities they never knew they possessed, like Jennifer Walsh had in Chicago. Others would resist change so fundamentally that termination would be the only viable option. The key was identifying which category each individual fell into as quickly as possible to minimize disruption and maximize the chances of successful cultural transformation. Her preliminary team list included Maria Santos, a forensic accountant who had exposed embezzlement schemes in 3 Fortune 500 companies, Dr. James Patterson, an organizational psychologist specializing in corporate culture transformation, and Linda Chang, a change management consultant whose resume included successful restructuring of operations at companies even larger than Meridian Financial. The budget allocation would cover salaries for the core team, travel expenses for 18 months of multi-regional operations, technology upgrades needed to implement transparent performance tracking systems, and legal reserves for the inevitable challenges from displaced managers and their legal representatives. By midnight, Jonah had outlined a preliminary implementation strategy that prioritized regions based on the complexity of their dysfunction, the potential for resistance, and the strategic importance of early successes in building momentum for the broader initiative. Phoenix would serve as proof of concept for scaling beyond Chicago. Denver would test their ability to handle union-influenced environments. Atlanta would challenge their capacity to manage racial and cultural diversity in performance evaluation. Detroit would be the final and most complex test of whether systematic fraud could be eliminated without destroying regional operations entirely. The timeline was aggressive but achievable if everything proceeded according to plan. Of course, large-scale organizational change never proceeded according to plan, which was why the budget included substantial contingency reserves and the team included specialists in crisis management and damage control. As she finally prepared to leave her office, Jonah realized that tomorrow would be her last day as Regional Manager Martinez. Monday morning, she would become Vice President Martinez, with responsibilities that extended far beyond any single region or department. The title change represented more than just expanded authority. It signified her evolution from someone who solved problems within existing systems to someone who redesigned the systems themselves. The woman who had watched Derek Hoffman distribute awards to everyone except the people who actually deserved them would now be responsible for ensuring that similar injustices never occurred again at Meridian Financial. The scale of that responsibility was both humbling and energizing. Her final thought before leaving the office was about the thousands of employees throughout the company's 12 regions who were currently experiencing the same frustration she had felt 6 months ago, seeing their contributions ignored, their innovations credited to others, their careers stagnating despite exceptional performance. Within 18 months, those employees would work in an environment where excellence was recognized, innovation was rewarded, and advancement was based on measurable contribution rather than political manipulation. The transformation of Meridian Financial would become a case study in whether large corporations could successfully transition from hierarchical politics to merit-based evaluation. Success would influence management practices throughout American business for decades to come. Failure would serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of challenging entrenched power structures without adequate preparation and support. Either way, Vice President Martinez would be responsible for outcomes that extended far beyond her own career to influence the professional lives of thousands of people she had never met but whose potential had been systematically suppressed by the same dysfunctional systems she had once endured. The award ceremony that had triggered this entire sequence of events now seemed like ancient history, but its lessons remained relevant. Genuine achievement should be recognized, credit should go to those who earn it, and organizations that fail to value real performance will eventually be defeated by organizations that do. Monday morning would mark the beginning of the most challenging and consequential 18 months of her professional life. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.